Okay, so the last part of this module is the discussion about the acceptance of a change in the engagement. So here, we will be discussing about the change of the type of engagement in which the audit engagement have already been accepted and started, and during the course of the engagement, the management have requested to change it to another form of engagement. So what is the auditor's actions will be, and what are the instances where this change will be acceptable. Okay, so an auditor who, before the completion of the engagement, is requested to change the engagement to which provides a lower level of assurance, so he should consider the appropriateness of doing so before it can be changed. So again, just like what I have mentioned earlier, this is the case where the audit engagement has already been started, and during the course of the audit, the management has requested the auditor to change the engagement into a lower form of assurance. So here, the auditor should consider if it is appropriate to change it or not. So a request from the client for the auditor to change the engagement may be because of the following. Okay, it may be from a change in circumstances that affects the need for the service, meaning the management realized that they don't need the audit engagement, rather a much lower assurance engagement is only needed. Another is, it may be that there has been a misunderstanding as to the nature of the audit or related services that was originally engaged with, or there has a restriction on the scope of the engagement, or whether there has been imposed, or the management imposed or caused these circumstances. That's why limitation or restriction of the scope has existed. So this may be the reasons why there is a request from the client to the auditor to change the engagement. Okay, so the next is the auditor would consider carefully the reason that is given, okay, for the request or the change, particularly the implications of the restrictions on the scope. Okay, so in this case, probably there has been data or information on which the client would not want the auditor to obtain as audit evidence. Okay, so he should consider that as well. Because if that is the case, then the auditor should not change the engagement. He would rather disclaim an opinion or modify his opinion or even withdraw from the engagement. So a change in circumstances that affects the entity's requirement or misunderstanding related to the nature of service that was originally requested would ordinarily be considered a reasonable basis for the change. Okay, again, the reason that is acceptable for the change in engagement is whether these circumstances affects the entity's requirements or there has been misunderstanding as to the nature of the service. So these are the only reasons that are acceptable for changing the engagement. In contrast, a change would not be considered reasonable, meaning to say these are the instances where the auditor will consider their reasons for request of change as unacceptable if it appeared that the change relates to the information that is incorrect, incomplete, or otherwise unsatisfactory. Meaning, during the course of the audit, the auditor has found out that the data or the record or the information that is provided by the management is incorrect, incomplete, or unsatisfactory. Okay, so meaning there is something that exists in the preparation of the financial statements that it may lead to a belief, okay, on the part of the auditor that their FS is materially misstated. But because of that, okay, the management might be aware of that already, so they would change the audit engagement instead. But again, for the auditor, this is not an acceptable reason. Okay, if the auditor concludes that there is reasonable justification to change the engagement, and if the audit work performed complies with PSA that are applicable to change the engagement, the report issued would be appropriate for the revised terms, meaning the level of assurance would also follow with the type of engagement that they have changed, okay, for the new or for this change, engagement. So in order to avoid confusing the reader of the report, so they would include reference. So the management should attach this to their financial statements together with the auditor's report, the original engagement letter or the engagement, the nature of the engagement that they've entered with the auditor, any procedures that may have been performed in the original engagement except where the engagement is changed to an engagement to undertake agreed upon procedures, and thus reference the procedures that is performed. Okay, so meaning they should also include reference to those procedures that have been performed by the auditor during the course of the original engagement, so that the readers may understand that there is a change and why there is a change, okay, in the audit or in the engagement that was provided. So another is where the terms of engagement are changed, the auditor and the client should agree on the new terms, so they might issue another engagement letter. Another is the auditor should also not agree to change of engagement where there is no reasonable justification. So we have mentioned this especially when there is limitation as to the gathering of the audit evidence, or where the evidence provided by the management is incorrect, insufficient, and unsatisfactory. Okay, so an example might be an audit engagement where the auditor is unable to obtain sufficient appropriate audit evidence regarding the receivables of the client. Okay, and ask for the engagement to be changed to a review instead to avoid qualified or disclaimer of opinion. So in this case, this reason of the management is unacceptable because this is a limitation and not misunderstanding of the terms. Okay, so this is where this is an instance where the auditor should not accept the change in the audit engagement. Okay, if the auditor is unable to agree to change, or if the auditor is unable to agree to change the engagement and is not permitted to continue the original engagement, then what will the auditor do in this case? The auditor should withdraw and consider whether there is any obligation, either contractual or otherwise, to report the client, okay, such as those charged with governance or shareholders, the circumstances that necessitates the withdrawal of his services from the audit engagement. Okay, so again, if the reason of the management to change the engagement is unacceptable, the auditor can withdraw from the engagement, and he should report this matter to those charged with governance or to the shareholders, the circumstances why he needs to withdraw from the engagement. Okay, so that will be for our module number 4.